Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to get into something pretty fascinating today?
Always.
Well, today we're going to be talking about Sigmund Freud's The Psychopathology of Everyday Life.
Ooh, interesting.
So this book, it explores all those little errors that we make. Forgetting names, misplacing things,
Right.
even slips of the tongue,
Mm-hmm.
and what all of that might reveal about our unconscious minds.
Our unconscious minds, yeah.
So it's kind of like these little errors that we make.
Right.
They're these little windows into this hidden part of ourselves, this part that's always working behind the scenes.
Exactly.
Right. So why don't we start with something I think we've probably all experienced.
Okay.
Forgetting names.
Oh, yeah,
I know I do it all the time.
for sure.
Um, Freud actually opens the book with a personal story about forgetting the name Signorelli
Okay.
during a conversation about death and sexuality of all things.
Interesting combination.
So he didn't just brush this off as a simple memory lapse. He dug a little deeper
Right.
and realized that it was connected to a repressed thought, something he'd kind of pushed out of his conscious awareness.
Okay.
And it was about a patient's suicide that was linked to sexual issues.
So it wasn't just like a random forgetting of a name. It was specifically tied to something he was trying not to think about.
Yeah.
That's pretty fascinating.
It wasn't just forgetting a name. It was forgetting a name that was subconsciously linked to this difficult experience that he'd rather not think about.
Exactly. And this led him to this idea that we often replace forgotten names with substitutes
Okay.
that have a hidden connection to whatever it is that we're repressing.
Hmm.
So it's like our minds are trying to protect us from those uncomfortable thoughts, but those thoughts still find a way to kind of sneak out in these weird ways.
So it's not just about what we forget, it's what pops into our heads instead.
Exactly.
That
It's that substitute that's really important here.
Well, that's pretty insightful. I mean,
Yeah.
but wouldn't some people say that, forgetting a name is just a normal memory glitch?
Sure.
Not some, deep psychological issue.
Yeah, of course, not every instance of forgetting is a sign of like some deep-seated issue, but
Yeah.
Freud's point is that these slips can sometimes offer clues about what's going on beneath the surface of our awareness.
Okay.
So he uses another example this time about forgetting a foreign word to kind of illustrate this point.
Okay.
A man forgets the Latin word aliquis
Aliquis.
while discussing the limitations of his generation.
Okay.
So what's interesting here is, unlike the Signorelli example, where the forgotten name was linked to this kind of unrelated thought,
Right.
the forgotten word aliquis was directly related to the topic of conversation itself.
Hmm.
And what it turned out to be was anxieties about women's menstrual cycles.
So he was literally forgetting a word that was connected to a topic that he was anxious about.
Exactly.
Wow.
It's like his mind just went blank on that specific word because it was tied to this uncomfortable feeling.
Yeah.
And we see this chain of associations, relics, liquidation fluid,
Okay.
all leading back to the very thing he was trying to avoid. It's like his mind was desperately trying to protect him from those anxieties, but they still managed to surface in the form of this forgotten word.
So even a simple thing like forgetting a word can be a sign of these deeper anxieties that we're maybe trying to avoid confronting.
Exactly.
I mean, has something like that ever happened to you?
Oh, all the time.
I know I've definitely had moments where I've blanked on a word,
Right.
and now I'm wondering if there was more to it than I realized.
Yeah, exactly.
But forgetting names and words isn't the only thing that Freud talks about, right?
Right. He also delves into childhood memories
Okay.
and how they might not always be what they seem.
Okay.
So he suggests that often our earliest memories aren't actually the most significant events,
Hmm.
but rather seemingly trivial ones that stand in for repressed, emotionally charged experiences.
So those seemingly insignificant memories are actually symbolic of something much deeper.
Exactly.
Okay.
He uses this great example of a man who very vividly remembered the letter M having one more stroke than the letter N.
Okay.
And later it was revealed that this seemingly random memory was actually symbolic of his childhood curiosity about the physical differences between boys and girls, a curiosity that he had likely repressed.
So even seemingly mundane childhood memories can hold these hidden meanings and point towards these deeper, often repressed curiosities or anxieties.
Oh, sure.
It makes you wonder what our own childhood memories might be trying to tell us, right?
Absolutely.
But moving on from memory, another area where these unconscious sloops appear is in our speech.
Okay.
Freud calls them slips of the tongue, or what we might call speech blunders.
Right.
Yeah, we've all had those moments where we say something we didn't mean to.
For sure.
Sometimes it's just funny, but Freud says these slips can actually be quite revealing.
Right. He argues that these slips are often more than just mistakes. They can reveal underlying thoughts or emotions that we might be trying to keep hidden. He gives some pretty amusing examples, like a woman who accidentally said, "The doctor said he can eat and drink whatever I want,"
Uh-oh.
when talking about her husband's diet.
That does seem to suggest something about her personality, even if she wouldn't consciously admit it.
Right.
What other examples does he give?
Well, there's the man who mistakenly said 4 wives instead of 3,
Okay.
perhaps revealing a hidden desire for another wife.
Yeah, okay.
And a professor saying nostril instead of central during an anatomy lecture.
Okay.
Maybe a subconscious focus on a different body part.
Okay. Those are pretty funny.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how many times a day we're accidentally revealing our true feelings without even realizing it.
For sure.
But it's not just words, right?
Right.
Freud also talks about how these unconscious motives can show up in our physical actions, too.
You're exactly right. He calls them erroneously carried out actions.
Okay.
Meaning, even when we mess up physically, like picking up the wrong object or going to the wrong place,
Right.
there's often an unconscious motive driving that action.
So even our clumsiness could be a form of subconscious communication.
Exactly. Those seemingly random actions often have an underlying reason, reflecting our unspoken anxieties, desires, or even attempts at self-punishment.
Wow, that's a lot to take in. It seems like Freud is saying that nothing we do is truly random. There's always some underlying meaning, even if we're not aware of it.
Right.
It's making me question everything I do.
That's the power of Freud, I suppose. He makes us see the world and ourselves in a whole new light. But we've covered a lot of ground already. Why don't we take a pause here and pick up the rest of this fascinating exploration in part 2? So we've seen how these little slips of the mind, like forgetting names or mixing up words, can hint at these deeper anxieties or desires lurking beneath the surface.
That's like our unconscious is trying to send us these coded messages, and it's up to us to kind of crack the code.
Exactly.
But you mentioned earlier that Freud also noticed these unconscious motives showing up in our physical actions too, right?
That's right. It's not just about what we say or forget. It's also about the things we do.
Okay.
Freud noticed that even seemingly random physical errors, things like picking up the wrong object or going to the wrong place,
Right.
can be driven by these unconscious motives.
So like if I accidentally grab my house keys instead of my car keys, that could be more than just a simple mistake.
Exactly. Freud calls these erroneously carried out actions.
Right.
He uses the example of a doctor who mistakenly tried to open his lab door at the hospital using his house key.
Oh my gosh, I've totally done that before.
Right?
Especially when I'm really stressed or thinking about something else.
Yeah.
But what would Freud say about that?
He'd likely say that the doctor perhaps subconsciously wished he was at home instead of at the hospital dealing with work.
Okay.
The action, though, a mistake on the surface, might represent a deeper desire that wasn't consciously acknowledged.
So it's like our bodies are rebelling against our conscious minds, trying to take us where we secretly want to be. Yeah.
In a way, yes. There's another example where a doctor keeps ringing the wrong doorbell.
Okay.
He was visiting a patient, but kept ringing the bell for the floor above.
Okay.
And through analysis, he realized it was because he was feeling ambitious and subconsciously wanted to be seen as higher ranking than he was at that time.
So even a simple action like ringing a doorbell can be loaded with these hidden desires for status or recognition.
Right.
It makes you wonder if all those times I've gone to the wrong floor in a building, maybe there's a hidden reason behind it.
Perhaps.
What about those times when we accidentally break something? Does Freud talk about that?
Absolutely. He saw a lot of symbolism in those kinds of actions.
Okay.
He actually shares a personal anecdote about breaking his own inkwell cover.
Okay.
And through self-analysis, he realized he was feeling a sense of guilt and subconsciously wanted to offer a sacrifice to appease fate.
Wow, that's a pretty powerful image.
Yeah.
So he was essentially transferring his guilt onto the object and then breaking it to relieve that feeling.
That's one way to interpret it. He also talks about a case where a woman accidentally broke a statue after receiving good news about a sick family member.
So in that case, maybe the breaking wasn't about guilt, but relief and gratitude.
Right.
Expressed through this symbolic act.
Exactly. It's like those strong emotions needed an outlet, and the breaking of the object provided that release.
It's interesting how even destructive acts can sometimes have these positive underlying motives.
Right.
But it makes you wonder if all our actions have these hidden meanings. How much control do we really have over our behavior?
That's a question Freud grappled with throughout his work. He believed that a significant portion of our behavior is driven by these unconscious forces, things we're not even aware of.
So it's not just about forgetting names or ringing the wrong doorbell. It's about the possibility that our actions, even those we think are deliberate, might be influenced by a part of ourselves that we don't fully understand.
Precisely. And this brings us to a category of actions that are often very subtle, what Freud called symptomatic and chance actions.
What are those exactly?
Think about all those little fidgety things we do without even thinking about it.
Okay.
Playing with our hair, tapping our feet, adjusting our clothing.
Right.
Freud argued that even these seemingly insignificant actions can be loaded with unconscious meaning.
So like if I'm constantly like twirling my hair during a meeting, that could be a sign of something deeper.
Potentially, yes. He observed that these actions often arise during therapy sessions.
Okay.
When patients are struggling to express something directly,
All right.
it's like their bodies are finding alternative ways to communicate what their conscious minds can't or won't say.
So it's like a secret language our bodies are using to express these hidden anxieties and desires.
Exactly. One example that stands out is a physician who unconsciously placed his wooden stethoscope between himself and attractive patients.
Okay.
He wasn't doing it intentionally, but it served as a symbolic barrier,
Right.
perhaps representing repressed desires or discomfort.
It's amazing how even the smallest gestures can hold so much meaning.
Yeah.
It makes you realize just how complex and layered our behavior can be.
Right.
But what about those times when things just seem to happen by chance?
Mm-hmm.
Does Freud address that?
He does, and his perspective is quite fascinating. He argues that even the things we perceive as random or accidental are actually determined by unconscious motives. Essentially, he's questioning the very notion of chance.
So he's saying there's a reason for everything, even if that reason is hidden from our conscious awareness.
Right.
But how does he explain things like coincidences or those times when we have a gut feeling about something that turns out to be true?
He connects this idea to superstition,
Okay.
suggesting that our tendency to find meaning in random events stems from our desire to find a cause,
Yep.
even if that cause is projected onto external forces.
Right.
He shares an example of a woman who believed her dream predicted a real-life encounter.
Okay.
But on closer examination, it turned out she had subconsciously picked up on clues that led to this false sense of premonition.
So it wasn't actually premonition, it was just her unconscious mind kind of putting the pieces together without her even realizing it.
Exactly. It's like our minds are constantly searching for patterns and connections,
Right.
even when they might not be there. It's a way of creating order out of chaos,
Right.
of finding meaning in a world that can often feel random and unpredictable.
So those coincidences we experience might often be explained by our unconscious minds making connections that our conscious minds aren't aware of. It's like our brains are working behind the scenes, piecing things together without us even realizing it.
Precisely. It's like we're all living out our own personal narratives, and those narratives are shaped by both our conscious and unconscious minds.
Oh, that's a great point.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground here in part 2. Why don't we take a break and delve into the final insights from the psychopathology of everyday life in part 3.
We've been talking about how even the smallest slips and errors can reveal those hidden thoughts and desires lurking in our unconscious.
Yeah, it's like we're leaving little clues about our inner world scattered throughout our daily lives.
Exactly. But so far we've been focusing on things we do, things we say, things we forget. What about our memories? Does Freud see those as potential sources of these unconscious slips too?
Absolutely. In fact, he dedicates a whole section to what he calls errors of memory.
Errors of memory.
These aren't just instances of forgetting.
Okay.
There's situations where we have a memory,
Okay.
but it's distorted or even completely fabricated and we don't even realize it.
So it's like we're fully convinced that our memory is accurate, even though it might be totally up.
Precisely. He even admits to making some errors in his own book,
Oh, really?
The Interpretation of Dreams. He misattributed a quote and even got Schiller's birthplace wrong.
Wow, if Freud himself can make those kinds of memory errors, it makes you wonder how often it happens to the rest of us.
Right. And what's interesting is that he didn't just dismiss these as simple mistakes.
Okay.
Through self-analysis, he realized they were actually linked to repressed thoughts and feelings.
So it's like his unconscious was subtly influencing his memory. causing him to make those errors.
That's his theory, yes. He suggests this might happen more often than we realize. Think about how we recount shared experiences with friends or family.
Okay.
Don't we often distort or omit details, especially if those details are linked to uncomfortable emotions?
Oh, that's so true. I can
Ah,
think of times when I've told a story about something embarrassing that happened, and I've definitely left out some of the more cringeworthy parts.
yay.
It's like my mind is trying to protect my ego or something.
Exactly. It's like our minds are constantly editing and revising our memories,
Mm.
trying to shape them into a narrative that's more palatable.
But if our memories aren't always reliable, how can we trust our own perceptions of the past? It's kind of unsettling, isn't it?
It certainly raises questions about the nature of truth and how much we can actually know for sure. But Freud wasn't just interested in memory errors. He also explored how these unconscious slips can show up in our reading and writing.
Oh, like accidentally sending an email to the wrong person?
Yeah.
I've definitely done that before, and it can be pretty mortifying. But would Freud see something deeper in that kind of mistake?
He might, especially if the email revealed something you wouldn't consciously want that person to know.
Right.
He gives the example of a man who accidentally wrote to his brother instead of his fiancée.
Okay.
And the content of the letter revealed these hidden affections for the brother.
Wow, that's pretty intense. It's like the slip of the pen was a way for those hidden feelings to surface.
Right, and then there's the woman who kept signing documents with her maiden name years before she actually got divorced.
Oh, wow.
Perhaps a sign of subconscious desires for independence or a longing for a different life.
It seems like even something as simple as a signature can hold a lot of hidden meaning. And these aren't just isolated incidents, are they?
Right, Freud had also noticed a pattern of what he called combined faulty actions, where multiple errors happen in close proximity.
Like if I forget an appointment and then lose the object that I was supposed to bring to that appointment.
Exactly. He suggested that these combined errors often point to a stronger underlying motive, with the unconscious finding multiple ways to express itself.
So it's like our minds are really determined to get those repressed thoughts out in the open one way or another.
It's a fascinating idea, isn't it? It suggests that these slips and errors aren't just random occurrences, they're part of this larger interconnected web of unconscious activity.
This whole deep dive into the psychopathology of everyday life has been incredibly insightful, but I have to admit it's also a little unsettling.
I understand. It challenges our assumptions about how our minds work and how much control we really have over our own thoughts and actions.
It makes you realize just how much is happening beneath the surface of our awareness and how our actions might be influenced by forces we don't fully understand.
Perhaps that's the most important takeaway from all of this.
Okay.
A greater awareness of the unconscious forces at play within us,
Right.
and a willingness to explore the hidden meanings behind our everyday actions.
It's definitely given me a whole new perspective on those little slips and fumbles.
That's the power of Freud's work. It invites us to look deeper, to question our assumptions, and to embrace the mysteries of the human psyche.
Well said. And with that thought-provoking insight, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the psychopathology of everyday life. We hope you've enjoyed exploring these ideas with us. And remember, those seemingly insignificant errors might just be the key to unlocking a deeper understanding of yourself and the world around you. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those observations keen.